भगत महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास अविनाशक गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य श्री हरदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से गो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत गदाधर शिवशांति गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिना श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड के गोवर्धन के श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोर ईश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगामाई की जय। यमुनामाई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। हरदास श्रीमद भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन पद्मार्ग गोविंद की जय। समावेद भक्तवृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद जय। हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamati Sahe Nashtaprayeshu Apatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 30, Text 19 and Text 20. First we'll read Text 19. Yamadutau tada praptau bhimau sarabhasekshanau sudrishtvat trishta hridayah sakrinmutram vimunchati. Yamadutau tada praptau bhimau sarabhasekshanau sudrishtvat trishta hridayah sakrinmutram vimunchati. Yamadutau tada praptau bhimau sarabhasekshanau sudrishtvat trishta hridayah sakrinmutram vimunchati. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. At death he sees the messengers of the Lord of Death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine. Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki jai. There are two kinds of transmigration of a living entity after passing away from the present body. One kind of transmigration is to go to the controller of sinful activities, who is known as Yamaraj. Yeah, and the other is to go to higher planets of the Vaikuntha. Here Lord Kapila describes how persons engaged in activities of sense gratification to maintain a family are treated by the messengers of Yamaraja called the Yamadutas. At the time of death, the Yamadutas become the custodians of those persons who have strongly gratified their senses. They take charge of the dying man and take him to the planet where Yamaraja resides. The conditions there are described in the following verses. Text 20. Yatana deha avritya pasher batva gale balat naito dirgam advanham dhandyam raja batayata. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. As a criminal is arrested for punishment by the constables of the state, a person engaged in criminal sense gratification is similarly arrested by the Yamadutas, who bind him by the neck with strong rope and cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment. Every living entity is covered by a subtle and gross body. The subtle body is the covering of mind, ego, intelligence, and consciousness. It is said in the scriptures that the constables of Yamaraja cover the subtle body of the culprit and take him to the abode of Yamaraja to be punished in a way that he is able to tolerate. He does not die from this punishment, because if he died, then who would suffer the punishment? It is not the business of the constables at Yamaraja to put one to death. In fact, it is not possible to kill a living entity, because factually he is eternal. He simply has to suffer the consequences of his activities of sense gratification. The process of punishment is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Formerly, the king's men would take a criminal in a boat in the middle of the river. They would dunk him by grasping a bunch of his hair and thrusting him completely underwater. And when he was almost suffocated, the king's constable would take him out of the water and allow him to breathe for some time. And then they would again dunk him in the water to suffocate. This sort of punishment is inflicted upon the forgotten soul by Yamaraja, as will be described in the following verses. Om Apyan Tibirantas Nananjan Shalake Chakshur Maitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Shri Chaitanya Manodrishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Dukadamatim Dati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sivda Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Saganar Gunatantam Tam Sajivam Satvaitam Sagadutam Parjana Shaitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagan Lalita Sri Vishakhanvidamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishubhaniste Pranamami Haripriya Anchakalpatarubhyasya Kripasindhubhyasya Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavarna. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Muham Karo Devacharya Pangam Lange Degan Kripada Mahamante Shivaram Dhanatharma Paramandam Shri Chaitanya Vishwaram. Hare Krishna. So here we see in this chapter how Lord Kapiladev explains about the resultant actions of performing fruitive activities. So in these two slokas, it's mentioned as to how one performs activities to get some fruit. What is that fruit? The fruit is committing the fruit is actually taking the resultant reactions of performing sinful activities in the course of maintaining or rather achieving sense gratification by due to maintenance of one's family, that is wife and children at home. Now, as you all know, the beginning of purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions about there are two kinds of transmigration of the living entities. One is those who go to the spiritual world, which is free from the cycle of birth and death. And those who remember Krishna at the time of death, they don't see Yamaraj. They go straight to the Vaikuntha planets. But those who commit sinful activities, now sinful activities are a result of performing sinful, basically sinful activities are performed due to maintaining oneself in this material world. Particularly these two slokas mentions about in the process of trying to maintain a family, to trying to satisfy one's wife, children, etc. In that process, one is forced to perform sinful activities, commit sinful activities, for which he has to struggle. He has to take the reactions. And the reactions come in the form of punishment by Yamaraj. So these two slokas mention as to how Yamaraj punishes these sinful conditioned souls. So we will discuss in a little bit of detail how one is forced to perform these sinful activities, how in the process of trying to maintain his family, one commits sinful activities. And in the process, he has to undergo so many miseries in life. But on the other hand, if one leads a spiritual life, sattvic life, spiritual life, which is transcendental to the material nature, one can still be satisfied and avoid committing sinful activities and avoid seeing Yamadutas also. On the other hand, by practicing spiritual life perfectly and properly, one can go back to Godhead. That is mentioned here about Vaikunthas or spiritual planets like Goloka, etc. One gets the facility of that, where there is no birth, death, old age, and disease, and there is no miseries like Adhyatmika, Adibhautika, and Adidevika. So these are the two different transmigrations of the living entities. Now here, generally, Yamadutas are supposed to be very, very fiery looking. When one sees these Yamadutas, automatically one becomes very fearful on seeing them. Yamadutas are basically messengers of Yamaraja, and one who has committed a lot of sinful activities, here mentioned specifically about sense gratification, they have to see Yamaraja for reaping the benefits of their sinful activities. So, in the process, by already the Yamadutas are very, very fearful. And at the time of death, when one is forced to, when one sees these Yamadutas who will carry the soul to Yamaraja, they become much more fearful by seeing them. And in the process, they reach a stage where they pass much more stool and urine than normal, out of fear of seeing them. So, how the living entities are forced to commit sinful activities in this material world is mentioned, we'll discuss in brief. This is mentioned in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where King Rishabhadev instructs his sons. He says, Nunam brahmatta kurute vikarma yad indriya pretaya apnoti nas sadhu manye yadatmanoyam asan api kleshata asadeha. Says, when a person considers sense gratification as the aim of life, he suddenly becomes mad after materialistic living and engages in all kinds of sinful activity. He does not know that due to his present past misdeeds, he has already received a material body, which, although temporary, is the cause of his misery. So, one who considers that this life is meant for sense gratification only, he becomes mad after living in this world, and he wants to enjoy life as much as possible, irrespective of whatever activities he has to commit, even if it is sinful. He does not realize that he has already got this material body and is suffering because of his past misdeeds. And further, it is said that actually the living entity should not have taken a material body, but he has been awarded this material body for sense gratification. Therefore, I think it is not befitting an intelligent man to involve again in the activity of sense gratification, by which he perpetually gets material bodies one after another. So, one who has got a material body, he has got it as a result of performing sinful activities in the previous lives. And again, this he does not realize that he is suffering because of that and continues to perform sinful activities even in this life. What are these sinful activities? Like, for example, one wants to have sense gratification. He is not satisfied with whatever comes on his own. Now, everything is received by a living being due to one's karma and one's credit in his account. That is one credit in one's account. Supposing he has performed a lot of pious activities, one may get a lot of opulence. But many times, generally, what happens is that even if one receives a lot of opulence, he's not happy in this material world due to so many reasons which we'll go through. So sometimes a person reaches a stage that for the process of achieving sense gratification, he tries to beg, borrow, or steal. They say beg, borrow, or steal. For what? For committing active sinful activities like illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. These are the means by which one entails or one is entitled to get a material body that is full of miseries. The living entity actually not only commits, but he has got a tendency to enjoy these material senses, and that is why he is put into this material condition. So in the 5th canto, there is a mention about the talks between King Raghugana and Jadabharata. We all know this past time. Bharat Maharaj took the body of a deer, and again from deer he became Jadabharata. So he is going into the forest, and where he is asked to hold the palanquin by the orders of the king's order carriers. And then he refuses, and finally the king asks him, and Jadabharata actually gives a lot of chastisement, giving him some knowledge about self-realization. Somebody is calling. So he now gives knowledge about self-realization. So here in these few slokas, King Raghugana receives instructions from Jadabharata. We'll see what he says. This is in the 5th canto, 13th chapter, beginning onwards. He says, in the forest of material existence, there are 6 powerful plunderers. And when the conditioned soul enters the forest to acquire some material gain, the 6 plunderers misguide him. That means one enters, this material world is like a forest of material existence, where one enters. And when one enters to get some material gain, he is plundered by 6 forces. We will discuss that. So the conditioned merchant does not know how to spend that money, and it is taken away by these plunderers. Like tigers, jackals, and other ferocious animals in a forest that are ready to take away a lamb from the custody of its protector, the wife and children enter the heart of the merchant and plunder him in so many ways. Now, this is an example specifically for those who commit sinful activities in the process of trying to have sense gratification. So, in the detail, it is mentioned purport. In the forest, there are many plunderers like dacoits, jackals, and tigers. So, the jackals are compared to one's wife and children. In the dead of the night, jackals cry very loudly. And similarly, one's wife and children in this material world also cry like jackals. This is not meant for devotees of the Lord, but hardcore karmis who try to enjoy. So they, in the process, uh, they say here, mention the children say, Father, this is wanted, give me this, I am your dear son. The wife says, I am your dear wife, please give me this is not needed. So in this way, one is plundered by the thieves in the forest, not knowing that the aim of life, one is constantly being misguided and one spends his hard-earned money on clubs, brothels, liquor, slaughterhouses, and so forth. So due to sinful activities, one becomes implicated in the process of transmigration and thus has to accept one body after another. So those who are hardcore materially fruitive workers, in order to maintain their wife and children, they resort to committing sinful activities like meat eating, gambling, illicit sex, and so forth. And in the process, they have to suffer reactions for sinful activities. Then he says, in this forest, there are dense bowers composed of thickets of bushes, grass, and creepers. And in these bowers, the condition soul is always disturbed by cruelly biting mosquitoes, that is, envious people. Sometimes he sees an imaginary palace in the forest, and sometimes he is bewildered by seeing a fleeting friend or a ghost which appears like a meteor in the sky. So, a typical materialist household person performs these fruitive activities. To earn a livelihood, he engages in serving in industry or trade and etc. And sometimes he has to go perform a lot of sacrifices. These days, making money is not very easy. So one thinks the more I work hard, the more money I get, and the more sense gratification I can have to keep my family happy. So in this process of dealings, one comes across many undesirable people who are compared to biting of mosquitoes. We don't want mosquitoes to bite us, but still we come across mosquitoes. The envious people are compared to biting of mosquitoes. Supposing if somebody has got little wealth or opulence in the form of a nice family, children and all, there are many others in the society who become envious of this person. So this is the resultant that if one does not have, he wants to have to achieve happiness. And if one has got opulence, then what happens is surrounded by a lot of envious people. In the next sloka, Jadabharata says, My dear king, the merchant on the forest path of material world, his intelligence victimized by home, wealth, relatives, and so forth, runs from one place to another in search of success. That means when one attains some success, he immediately runs forth from one pillar to another to continue to have that success, which is not possible eternally. World is temporary, we are also temporary. And then further you say, sometimes his eyes are covered by a dust of a whirlwind. That is to say, in his lust, he is captivated by the beauty of his wife, especially during a menstrual period. Thus, his eyes are blinded and he cannot see where to go and what he's doing. So, sometimes the household attraction is so much that he gets carried away by the beautiful, seeing the beauty of his wife. And sometimes what happens in the process, he wanders from one place to another looking after other sources for satisfaction of his lusty desires. And in the following sloka, it says, wandering in the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sounds, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by the sound of owls, which are just like the harsh words of his enemies. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits and flowers. He approaches such a tree due to his strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he's simply illusioned by the mirage and he runs after it. So the material world is full of envious people. Even within one's friend circle or circle of society of relatives, etc., one tries to hear a lot of sound vibration from like a cricket the forest. Cricket is a small insect. One cannot see this cricket, but one can hear the sound and it becomes aggrieved. So this is in the nature of this world. One cannot avoid mental distress because of the caused by the envious people. But being such aggrieved, sometimes he goes to a sinful person for help. One has already committed sinful activities, but because he is feeling morose, because he cannot achieve satisfaction, he goes to take shelter of another sinful person, and he tries to achieve a small amount of happiness which also does not exist. He further becomes morose and is in distress. And following sloka it says, sometimes the conditioned soul jumps into a shallow river, or being short of food grains, he goes to beg food from people who are not at all charitable. So sometimes a person reaches a stage where his means of living are not sufficient enough to sustain his family. It started with satisfying the senses to maintain his family. But then gradually he reaches a stage where it is mentioned one tries to beg food grains from people who are not at all charitable. So we see sometimes, many times, people take money from here, there, and all those things, and they become overburdened with debt. And then what further happens? He suffers from the burning heat of the household life, which is like a forest fire. And sometimes he becomes sad to have his wealth, which is as dear as life, plundered by kings in the name of heavy income taxes. So on one side, he wants to commit sinful activities to maintain his family, but he's not able to do that. Then he tries to get more money, in the process commits more sinful activities, and to get that relief from that, he approaches more sinful people, and he's surrounded by such sinful people. And if not, finally, then what happens is that he's plundered by kings in the name of heavy income taxes. As you see here, yesterday when I was talking to somebody, he was mentioning how it is very hard to struggle in this material world to make money. He was mentioning that all in all, a person pays up to about 58% or 60% of his income as taxes. And actually, these taxes are to be collected by the government, who are supposed to facilitate the citizens in many ways. One is to help them advance spiritually, and the other also in materially to provide facilities so that they can have a comfortable living. But as we see today, uh, hardly you will find any government personality who tries to promote what is the purpose of human life. And also, apart from that, there is no proper facility given, with the result that man has to struggle a lot to maintain his living. And in spite of all these things, he pays the taxes to government, which does not provide sufficient facilities. So in the following sloka, it says that sometimes being defeated or plundered by a superior powerful agent, a living entity loses all his possessions. He then becomes morose and lamenting their loss. He sometimes becomes unconscious. Sometimes he imagines a great palatial city in which he desires to live happily with his family members and riches. He thinks himself fully satisfied if this is possible, but so called happiness continues only for a moment. So sometimes in this forest, what happens? He dreams of having a building a big palace or a castle, and then these things don't last for a long time. Example is given like, uh, even if somebody tries to do something in the seashore, one will find a lot of children building castles of sand, and in no moment tides of waves come and then take away that castle, and the children cry, and the parents also keep observing that. So similarly, the laws of material nature are such that no one can live peacefully with even with his family. And he thinks that all that he can be is permanent, but everything is temporary in this material world. Activities are temporary, resultant reactions are also temporary, the family is temporary, everything is temporary. And one looks for happiness in this material world, which is like a drop of water in the entire desert. Desert is without water, and one feels that even if he gets one drop of water, he is very happy, and that happiness is also an illusion in this material world. Then following sloka I mentioned, sometimes the merchant of the forest in the forest wants to climb the hills and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear, his feet are pricked by small stone patterns and by thorns on the mountain. And being pricked by them, he becomes very much aggrieved. Sometimes a person who is very attached to his family becomes overwhelmed with hunger, and due to his miserable condition, he becomes furious with his family members. So here we see a condition of a typical conditioned soul. He goes outside, struggles very hard, and is compared to a traveler in the forest, which is full of thorns and bushes and stones. So all the he tries to get from the society of friends, relative, etc., are all artificial, and they are like a drop of water in the scorching heat of a desert. One wants to become very great and powerful in the society. That means he has got an internal desire that even after getting wealth or some opulence, he wants to become a very powerful person in the society, which is also not uh, uh, good enough to give him happiness. So, being in the association of such hungry people, he wants to climb a mountain full of thorns. I mean, it is mentioned as to how 99% of the population is unhappy under such circumstances. So, in the Western countries, example Sri Prabhupada gives is that one tries to satisfy his family, and when he is not able to satisfy, he looks for other source of enjoyment in the form of other women, etc. And then these lead to illicit sex and illicit activities. And then it is mentioned that the conditioned soul in the forest sometimes swallowed by a python or crushed. At such a time, he is left lying in a forest like a dead person, devoid of consciousness and knowledge. Sometimes other poisonous snakes bite him, and being blind to the consciousness, he falls down into a dark well of hellish light with no hope of being rescued. So sometimes in the forest, he is uh, bitten by snakes. Here, the example is given that sometimes in the process, for example, when works in a highly opulent atmosphere, these days corporates, women also work, women from different communities, different backgrounds, some maybe beautiful, some not. But what happens in order to have little enjoyment, he looks after the other woman, and sometimes he reaches a state where he's insulted and chastised by them also. This is something like taking honey from a beehive and being attacked by the bees itself. So sometimes he goes after another woman, other women, and then he's attacked just like attacked by the bees. He's attacked by the other women and society friends also. So sometimes he tends to spend lots of money in that society, and in the process of trying to get another woman for extra sense enjoyment, that enjoyment is also taken away, and sometimes women are kidnapped by other debauchees. One may try to cheat one woman, but then there are others who cheat that women also, such type of women also. So this is how day after day, a one who is trying to achieve a lot of sense gratification. Sometimes he does illicit activities or illegal activities, knowingly or unknowingly. And Sri Prabhupada mentions also that one can satisfy his lusty desires with his wife without creating disturbance in the society and being punished for doing so. So, in the process of trying to satisfy their senses, one creates a disturbance by going to other type of women, and then creates a disturbance in the society, and also suffers by being punished by the messengers of Yamaduta. And the following sloka, it says that on the path of material existence, sometimes the person is without wealth, and due to this does not have a proper home, bed, or sitting place, nor proper family enjoyment. He goes to beg money from others, but when his desires are not fulfilled by begging, he wants to borrow or steal the property of others. Thus, he is himself in the society. So, first he tries to beg, and then sometimes, if that doesn't work, he tries to borrow or steal the property of others. So, this is a typical mentality of a fruity worker who generally they end into such results. And then finally, what happens? That is also given in the subsequent verses. Due to monetary transactions, relationships become very strained and end in enmity. So many times we find that, particularly in Kali Yuga, we do so many monetary transactions which result in strained relationships and ultimately become enemies to one another. So sometimes the husband and wife walk on the path of material progress, and to maintain their relationship, they work very, very hard. Sometimes due to scarcity of money or due to distress condition, they are embarrassed and almost die. So sometimes to keep to try to satisfy each other, one has to struggle very hard. But inevitably, people have to die at some point of time without any material success also. One more important point here mentioned is he says that, my dear king, on the forest path of material life, first a person is bereft of his father and mother. And after their death, he becomes attached to the newly born children. In this way, he wanders on the path of material progress and is eventually embarrassed. Nonetheless, no one knows how to get out of this even up to the moment of death. Now, here it is very clearly mentioned that family life generally means one thinks that it is an institution of sex. No. Of course, through sex, the father and mother beget children, and the children get married, and they go down and follow the same path of sexual life if they are not given the real knowledge. And after death of the father and mother, children also get married and they beget their own children also. Thus, generation after generation, these things go on in the same way without anyone attaining liberation from the embarrassment of material life. So we see that grandparents die, parents also die, and we also have to die sometime. And children also, even though they may get married and have children, they also have to die. But this is something that nobody realizes, nor anybody even attempts to know that there is something called death that will approach everyone. So why should one die? Why should one again take birth? This is an inquiry that one should make in the human form of life. Skip a few things. Yeah. People with a poor fund of knowledge take shelter of non-devotee cheaters and pretenders in order to be saved from the clutches of death. Sometimes he takes shelter of so-called gurus and sadhus who are like crane, heroines, and vultures, and thus he is cheated both ways by not taking shelter of the Supreme Lord. Many times, what happens when a person struggles in this material life, either due to trouble in his work atmosphere or in the family, he tries to seek shelter from outside in the spiritual platform itself. But today we will find that even the spiritual platform, there are so many so-called cheating religions practiced by so-called cheating gurus. And when one has got a tendency to achieve a shortcut without understanding the proper truth, one may end up into such religious institutions. And we will find that so many have come and gone, and so many have cheated many of so-called money also. I've seen so many people who have donated a lot in charity to such religious institutions. Neither have they benefited nor the institutions have benefited. So sometimes they take shelter of who are compared to these sadhus and gurus are compared to crane, heroines, and vultures. So he's not only cheated at home, but he's also cheated in these institutions. And then following verse, he says, Jadavarta says, being cheated by them, the living entity in the forest of material world tries to give up association of these so-called yogis, swamis, and incarnations and come to the association of real devotees. But due to misfortune, he cannot follow the instructions of the spiritual master or advanced devotees. Therefore, he gives up their company and again returns to the association of monkeys who are simply interested in sense gratification and women. So, by chance, due to his some fortune, if one comes across a real religious institution and comes in the association of devotees, he fails to follow the instructions of the spiritual master. And then what happens is that he goes back to the association of so-called monkeys who are sense gratifiers. And in this way, he spoils his life simply by indulging in sex and intoxication. And looking into the face of other sense gratifiers, he becomes forgetful and thus approach death. So this way, one passes his life up to the stage of death, trying to be in the society of sense gratification. And one does not discover his real interest even at the point of death. That means material life is such that the cause of material life is sexual attraction, but he becomes implicated in so many ways and cannot understand the aim of life. And then subsequently it is said that in this material world and the conditioned soul forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and does not care for Krishna consciousness. And because of that, he simply engages in different types of mischievous and sinful activities. He is then subjected to the threefold miseries, and out of fear of elephant of death, he falls into a darkness found in the mountain cave. So everyone is afraid of death. Not that anyone is not afraid of death. Now at this stage, one may think that what is there? I can enjoy life as much as possible. But one has to reach a stage of old age. One has to reach a stage of disease, which is very common in this material. If you ask somebody who is suffering from cancer, he will, when he goes through chemotherapy and all those things, when he comes back, he suffers a lot of pain. Similarly, at the time of death, one has to go through a lot of uh, stages in his bodily material body, which does not let him think of Krishna very easily. Why? Because he has been conducting so many sinful activities that he cannot even think of devotee or think of God, and his body is puts him into so much of trouble. So we will go through that also. There are examples as to how, after one's father's death, a son tries to inherit his money and use it for sense gratification. Similarly, when one whose son dies tries to enjoy the possession of his son, sometimes the father of a dead son even enjoys his son's widow. So this is something that we see very practically. When one's father dies, he sees how to inherit the property. Or if somebody in the younger generation dies, the father might think, how can I enjoy the property or the son's wife? They are all very, very common things that we see in the material world. And then when one goes through all these things, what happens? That is also mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The king of Pitas is Yamaraja, the very powerful son of the sun god. He resides in Pataloka with his personal assistants called Yamadutas. And while abiding by the rules and regulations set down by the Supreme Lord, he has his agent Yamaduta bring all the sinful men to him immediately upon their death. And after bringing them within his jurisdiction, he properly judges them according to their specific sinful activity and sends them to one of the many hellish planets for suitable punishment. So, what happens when one commits a lot of sinful activities? Yamaraja, everything is noted by Yamaraja uh, in his diary, each and every living entity. What are the rules and regulations that are set by the Lord? And Yamaraja is also a great devotee of the Lord who abides by the rules and regulations set forth by the Lord. And he has got a lot of assistants called the Yamadutas. And when one is dying or is about to die, these Yamadutas, they bring all the sinful, of course, after death, they are taken to Yamaraja. And after bringing them, Yamaraj actually judges them according to their specific sinful activities and sends them to one of the many hellish planets for suitable punishment. So, Yamaraja does not have an authority to violate the rules and regulations that are given by the Supreme Lord. And he sends them to these conditioned souls, sinful souls, to such hellish planets for punishment. And one such example is given that a man or a woman who indulges in sexual intercourse with an unworthy member of the opposite sex is punished after death by the assailants of Yamaraja in the hell known as Taptas Surmi. That means if one who indulges in illicit sex with the opposite sex is punished by Yamaraja and sent into a hell. Where what is the punishment is given? There, such women are beaten with whips. The man is forced to embrace a red hot iron form of a woman, and the woman is forced to embrace a similar form of a man. Such is the punishment for illicit sex. That means that in the hellish planet, one is forced to embrace a form of a woman which is like a red hot iron. See, suppose a red hot iron is brought in front of you, and then one is forced to embrace that. You can't do it. But in the court of Yamaraj, one has to go through that also. So not only is death very, very fearful, and after death also one has to go through a lot of punishment. And one such punishment is also mentioned in the subsequent sloka. Example is given. It says that the process is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now here there is mentioned as to subtle body and gross body. There are two types of bodies we all have. One is a gross body that is made out of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And the other is a subtle body called mind, intelligence, and false ego, and also consciousness. So Yamaraja, they carry the subtle body of the sinful person and take him to Yamaraja to Yamadutas take such body, subtle body, to be punished in a way that he is able to tolerate. Now, it is said that the pain that one goes through the subtle body, that is mind, intelligence, false ego, and his consciousness, is much more than the uh, pain that one goes through in this material world. That means we already struggle a lot at the time of death. There are so many other examples, we don't have time to discuss that. So at the time of death, when one sees these Yamadutas, he becomes very, very fearful. And the result is that he passes extra stool and more urine. And if any of you see a person who is going to die, he will reach a stage. There are also examples, such noises he comes out of his mouth. So these are all practical things that we say, but Shastra has explained why these things happen. And the pain that one goes through the mind, intelligence, and false ego and the consciousness is much, much more than the pain that he goes through in the material world through his gross body. That is, our material bodies like bones, flesh, and all. We may face a lot of difficulties. We may go through a lot of pain, which is a hard struggle in the process of hard work and committing sin, in the process trying to sense gratify. We may commit a lot of sinful activities. That pain which we go through here, the struggle which we go through, is nothing compared to the pain that one goes through in the hellish planets. And that is what is mentioned as the subtle body. The subtle body goes through a lot of pain when one undergoes the punishment. What is that punishment? This is also explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is one example. Earlier days, the king used to take the criminal in a boat in the middle of a river. And then they would hold the criminal by his hair and they will put him in a water and they will push him underwater to such an extent that he struggles to breathe. And just at that time, they would pull him out. And again, when he is taken a little bit of breathing, again he is pushed into the water and he struggles to breathe and again he is taken out. So he is put again and again into the water to such a state that he suffocates. And this sort of a punishment is mentioned is inflicted upon the forgotten soul by Yamaraj, which will be further described in the following verses. So the following verses describe how more and more examples are given, how a person has to suffer in the hellish planets in his subtle body, which will be much more severe than in his gross body. And this is a cycle that goes on. And then what happens is that one gets another body. There are 84 lakh species of life. The soul is the same, but the external form of species may be different from one to the other. So sometimes it is mentioned that a hog likes to eat stool. So in his life, in this human form of life, likes to eat anything that is available, which is compared to stool, like meat eating, etc. People eat so many different types of things these days. There is no limit to. If you go abroad to foreign countries, you can see and you can hear about them. You can practically see also people who eat lizards, people eat so many other things, unimaginable things. Of course, in India also we have started doing all these things by copying the Western world. So what happens is that when one puts these living, innocent living entities for a lot of into a lot of difficulties to attain some sense gratification, one has to suffer at the end of one's life in the form of reactions. So these are different type of examples that one has to go through, which is very, very painful. Now, Shastras also mention Jivo Jivasya Jivanam. So if one kills another living entity for the purpose of sense gratification, he has to take that form of life in the next life. And he has to go through the same pain which he has inflicted on that living entity. In order for him to experience that, he is given a small trial in the court of Yamaraj, just to show how painful it is for him to suffer that reaction. And then in the next body, he goes to the same pain with a new body. And even if he gets a body of a human being also, which is also very difficult to attain, he has to go through so many reactions that he cannot explain, because uh, one in the lower species of life, the soul can transmigrate to any form of life. Sometimes it can get even a ghostly body. This is also explained in the Shastras. Those who get ghostly bodies, they don't have a gross body to satisfy the senses. So they're having a subtle body. And these ghosts run after one after the other who are weak in their senses, and they sit in that body. So we might see that many times those who are living also, they live like ghosts. So these are all creatures, living entities who trouble others. So whatever trouble we give to other living entities, we have to take this in the form of sinful reactions uh, uh, at some time or the other, definitely at the end of this life, and go through the punishments like this in the court of Yamaraj, and then take the next form of life, which is also subject to miseries. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. If any of you have got any questions, any comments, you can ask me on this subject. There is also a mention, sorry, sometimes one might have everything, but he may not be able to enjoy these opulences like wealth, etc., at the time of one's death, because he has to die, he has to reach at old age, and his wife also has to die. So this is a cycle that goes on, and at the time of death, he thinks, who will maintain my wife, who will take care of my family, etc. These are thoughts that come into a person at a time who is going to die. And he does not have time to think about Krishna, because throughout his life he has not spent in the association of devotees. He has spent in the association of duty workers. Okay. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. Anybody, any questions, any comments? So it is a lesson for us to learn how to utilize this human form of life to be in the association of devotees and practice Krishna consciousness, so that we can think about Krishna, we can chant the holy names of Krishna and hear Krishna Katha and become free from this material world. Any questions? Any comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Very
Hare
nicely
Krishna.
explained about the death and the last stages of forgetting Krishna. Sometimes it happens. So we have
Yes,
to be in the divinity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji. So I think this class has concluded. Thank you all very much. ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय.